if the science and the advice changed such that keeping schools open would no longer be in the best interests of children and teachers, that we would act. We are now at that stage.
This week will be the last till who knows when Hanover School in North London and every other school in the country will open its doors. Possibly the next time the eldest children here go to school, it'll be to a different school altogether. This was the government bowing to the inevitable. Here, as elsewhere, attendance had been declining across the week. 80% on Monday, 70 on Tuesday, 50 today. The kids here are aware of what's going on. How could they not be? With classes collapsed together because of the virus, all they could do was draw it. What do you know about it?
It's new.
It is new, yeah, it's true.
Plus, it came from animals, I think.
God, you're very well informed.
Sick animals.
Career in epidemiology
Cats
beckons.
and dogs.
But this week has been a nightmare for many teachers, keeping kids entertained and informing parents at the same time when they've had little idea what to say.
At the moment, of our 12 class teachers, we've got 7 self-isolating. Overall, about half of our staff are self-isolating at home. We've been able to stay open merely because of the number of children who are also staying off school now.
We have had to make sure that our communication is really clear, that we've stayed calm and present, and we've held them emotionally, if you like, to make sure that they aren't overwhelmed by the anxiety that they're feeling. We've had to paddle very hard under the surface to make it appear calm and business as normal at school.
There is now clarity about what will happen on Friday, but almost nothing about what comes next, where the kids go, who the key workers are, how kids will be assessed.
So I think actually it has been probably the right decision to make, but as I understand it, they will be graded on their performance over the year. And again, details will come out, over the next few days.
Who's on our team?
Generally, we can understand that as a society, we need to make sure that our fantastic NHS workers are available. We need to make sure those people can be at work. And if there's something we can do to help with their children, then that's something that we have to look at.
And those are the simple bits. Thorniest of all will be the issue of vulnerable children. Today, the Education Secretary promised they could stay at school, but it isn't clear how easy that will be. And if it isn't done, there could be serious consequences. Speaking to a local authority source, they tell me that they're very concerned about the potential impact of school closures on vulnerable children. Specifically, they say their ability to check on those kids is being impeded at the moment by coronavirus. They've got so many social workers off sick or in self-isolation. And in these circumstances, it's the schools which are the canary in the coal mine, the early warning system when something is going wrong. Without them, they say, those kids could be at risk.
Aside from keeping our workforce going, I think there is potentially a real time bomb in terms of those children who we know are already really struggling in society, and the idea that we might lose touch with them, that they might not be able to cope, and that actually no one would have good oversight of the state in which they found themselves. So we already have plans as a school about calling our most vulnerable families on a daily basis, for example, but how sustainable that is over a very long period of time, it remains to be seen.
The other thing that concerns us is at such time that schools reopen, how will we know? How will we know that it's safe to come out to play again? How will we know that our children are ready to come back, and what will that be like for them having been absent for such a long time? So I think it's all very well thinking about closing, but how are we ever going to reopen, and what's it going to be like on the other side? These are all big questions that nobody has an answer for.
The classroom, the coat pegs, the tests, the trips, the goodbyes at the end of the day. Some of the earliest imprints on our memories. For a generation of British school kids, though, those imprints will look different to ours, an education emptier than it should have been.
Lewis Goodall there. Well, joining us now, Damien Hines, the former Conservative Secretary for Education, Torsten Bell, the Chief Executive of the think tank, the Resolution Foundation, and from Leeds, Janet Sheriff, who's the Executive Head Teacher at Prince Henry's Grammar School. And if I can, Janet, I'll start with you. What are you expecting to be the reaction at the school gates tomorrow from parents? I know we've heard there's been a lot of sort of paddling beneath the surface from teachers trying to keep everything calm.
I think that there's still going to be just a lot of questions from our students, from our parents, from our staff. There's a certain degree of certainty given to us today about what's going to happen on Friday at the end of school, but actually it has raised just more and more questions in terms of what is going to happen after that. And I know that when I go into school tomorrow morning that I will be faced with, say, the Year 11, the Year 13 students, and they'll be looking to their teachers to say, well, what is going to happen? And at the moment, we don't have the full details to be able to reassure them.
Do you think you have the capacity to keep teaching kids at home? I know that you're an iPad school now. Is that your intention, to keep monitoring and doing lessons with the children remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, our school does have a bit of an advantage because we've got an iPad one-to-one scheme in school. And so our teachers and our students are used to communicating in that way, in setting tasks and completing tasks using that technology. However, I think it is a very different thing when the students are at home every day, all day, for however many weeks, and trying to keep that structure in their lives and to try and keep the routine of lessons going. We've been doing our best to prepare our teachers, have not only been delivering lessons during the day, but they've been spending time thinking about and planning the online learning resources so that it can continue that remote learning once the schools have closed.
And briefly, Lewis was focusing on his in his piece very much on vulnerable children, and he said that schools were often the canaries in the coal mine. They learnt the warning signs if kids weren't showing up, if there were extra problems at home, if things were going wrong. Do you think you will still be able to keep that link, keep vulnerable children and give them the pastoral care they need at this point?
I think it is going to be a real challenge. I was obviously really pleased that the government in their announcement have identified that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with and that they have put in place arrangements that focus on the vulnerable students. However, I think in the reality of making it work is going to be quite challenging. To begin with, some of these vulnerable children, we have to do a lot of coaxing just to get them to school in the first place for some of those. I think it's going to be even harder when many of their peers are not coming to school to actually get them to come to school, even though the school is open for them. And so I think that we're going to have to think carefully about how we can make that, attractive to them. And for those that don't turn up, that should be in school, yes, that regular communication through other methods. But I think it is really important that there are other people in the community, not just schools.
Yeah, that are taking on that role.
These children.
Let me pick up in the studio now, because you heard Janet sounds incredibly calm, but she raised more questions than clearly they've had answers to. And we know that the government, I think Britain was one of the last countries to take these measures, and yet it hasn't been able really to provide any understanding of what happens after Friday.
Well, I mean, this is a very big set of measures today, and it's, commensurate with the scale of what we're facing in deciding when this was going to happen. And I think Mrs. Sheriff and her colleagues and parents have known this day was coming. In deciding when it was going to come, I mean, it's an almost impossible balance to strike because, of course, this is about slowing the spread of this virus, but it also means, you know, weeks of lost school time for children, and it means disruption for parents and all the knock-on effects of that. So it's a big package. Actually, I think there is quite a lot of detail in it, but inevitably some of the things that need to be worked out, like on qualifications.
Well, before we even get there,
very complex
we don't
topic,
even
and
know.
will take some time.
We don't really know who the key workers are. We were told very briefly it was NHS, police, supermarket. Is that it?
Well, hang on. We were also told there will be a list forthcoming from the Cabinet Office. I mean, I think as soon as tomorrow. So, and the list of key workers doesn't only apply in education settings, there's other use for it as well. That's why it comes from the Cabinet Office. I mean, one of the things I asked in Parliament today was that there should be some flexibility. So schools will sometimes be able to identify where somebody who may not be on a key workers occupation list, or indeed somebody who may not be in the strict designation of vulnerable children, they may know that actually provision should be made for that child as well. So some flexibility, I think, will be helpful.
And children will be in a real state of limbo this evening. There might be short-term exhilaration, longer-term desperation.
Yes.
And you heard teachers saying, you know, it's easy to plan an exit, but then you might have 6 months of kids who are literally missing out half a year of education and wondering what they do in that time, whether they can gather, whether they can play sport together, or whether all that counts as the measures that they're shutting for in the first place.
Well, let's be clear, they can't miss half a year of education. It's not the same as schooling. Schooling is the best. There's something magical about the teacher at the front of the room, what they can make happen in a class. But I know a lot of schools already have been doing some preparation work about, you know, building up the programme of work to do from home. It's not the same as just setting a bit of cover work. It's much, much more complex than that. A lot of thought is going into it, and there will be more as well. Your organisation, the BBC, I gather, is planning good extra programming in educational in educational modules.
But won't have any ability to monitor whether kids, you know, are watching and doing homework and following. You know, it's a very different sort of scheme, isn't it?
No ability to monitor. So I was just going to say technology, and Mrs. Sheriff mentioned this as well, plays a part.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it should be the whole part. It's very important to have blended methods of learning. But you know, there are ways these days of staying in touch with families. You were talking earlier about particularly with vulnerable families and having key workers being in close touch with them. But also more broadly, it's possible to stay in touch and have a two-way communication on progress.
What we're really understanding, Torsten, is how central schools are to the whole economy of the country now, right?
Yeah, I mean, what we're hearing here is the challenges to teachers and to the kids themselves about a big change to their lives. But what we're all going to be feeling is the big change it means for our economy. 34% of all workers in our economy have a child under 16. This is a massive, massive deal, and it comes on top of social distancing measures, not going to shops, not going to restaurants, that are already having a huge effect on our economy. And it's almost hard to, you know, understate how swift this change has been for our economy. These are really very serious times. They are not happening directly because of the coronavirus. They are happening because of our response to it. And that is, you know, that's the right thing to do. But that is a very, very unusual kind of economic shock, and our response to it needs to start stepping up to that.
Stepping up more than we are doing.
Significantly more.
It feels like a levelling action today, but it won't be, will it? I mean, it will affect different families in very different ways, according to the age of the kids, or how many parents are working, or the kind of jobs they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in lots of different ways. If you think about who works in the sectors that have already been most affected by what we're talking about, the social distancing measures, we're talking about 5 million people working in the likes of retail, hospitality. These are lower paying sectors. They earn about over £100 less a week on average than the rest of the population. And then if we look at what's happened today, schools, being able to manage this is going to be significantly easier if you can keep your income and work from home. I'm not saying for any parent that's going to be having kids at home while they work from home that is going to be easy.
There's very little work, yeah.
But let's be clear, low earners, the entire bottom half of earners, only 1 in 10 of them can work at home.
Right.
It's 5 times that at the top. So this is very different depending on where you are in the income distribution.
Janet Sheriff, let me go back to you for your thoughts on exams. It sounds like they've been cancelled for May and June, and we don't know whether that means cancelled entirely, but we're guessing yes. That would come down to what? Teacher assessment? Do you feel comfortable with that? Would teachers feel comfortable that gives the right impression of a child who would have been sitting exams? Is it fair?
Well, I think teachers do have a lot of knowledge and information and data about students and about how they have performed, both in their trial exams, their mock exams, but also in ongoing assessments and, some of the tasks, the assessment tasks that they have done. So, there is a lot of knowledge there and teachers do really know their students. However, I think, I can really understand the frustration of young people that have been working really hard and revising and thinking, in the real exam, I'm going to do even better. Yeah. And that is going to be really hard for some of our students to kind of accept. And that is going to be a big disappointment to them.
And Damien, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, the point of an exam is it takes out all the personality, all the kind of, character shocks that you might have with a particular pupil or a particular teacher, and that re-enters now. There are some kids who will make a less good impression during the year, won't get their stuff together for a coursework, might think that they're going to cram at the last minute.
Yeah. Well, look, it is difficult, but Emily, the question is, so what else are you going to do? I mean, we have to face up to this crisis, and I think this is saying not having the exams is the only sensible way to do it.
Can I just check? So it wouldn't be a September, October post holidays.
Well, I think the education department will be in close conversation with Ofqual, the qualifications body, to look at all the different ways that you might do it. I mean, the fallback is, of course, teacher assessment, but as Mrs. Sheriff says, I mean, these days there's a lot of data in schools. In fact, in some ways, sometimes too much data in the system. But in a situation like this, it could really come into its own. Some kids, in some subjects, there's assessment as well. So there is some material there to go on and to make sure that it is fair. And I just wanted to clarify one thing from your conversation earlier with Angela. Of course, there's not a question of children not getting qualifications. They will get qualifications. It's the question of how those qualifications are certified, and it does have to be fair, reflect those children's achievements, the work they put in, showing what. But
the yearbook of 2020 will look very different for a lot of kids now.
Yeah,
that's the truth. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Business in Beirut has been losing customers over the past 5 months due to the dire economic situation. Now, because of the coronavirus, they can barely accept customers at all.
We are receiving punches after punches, and now the coronavirus, it gives us the KO. We had to close both places due to the coronavirus. We closed the rooftops, we closed the gym in Hamra, we closed the pool in Hamra, so we are only open for our guests.
Their hotels are allowed to stay open, but restaurants, bars, gyms and cafes are not. The Duranis employ around 150 people in 2 locations, many of whom they currently don't have shifts for.
I'm not sure. Maybe in the future we will all close.
Without clear guidelines from the government, sister company, the Saifi Institute for Arabic, has chosen to function via Skype instead of having students come into class. But the economic problems they face make running the business difficult anyway.
We started with the economical situation, the exchange rate for the Lebanese lira versus dollars, and then you cannot transfer overseas, you cannot pay by credit card, you cannot withdraw more than $300 every 15 days. So all these decisions start to pile up more and more on any business. Then as if we needed that, but the coronavirus came and added that and made it it's catastrophe.
Hospitality and tourism are large parts of the Lebanese economy. So if they suffer, the effect is far-reaching.
Because of the crisis, we're going to have a stagflation, meaning that the economy will shrink by 20-30%.
IMF figures put poverty at around 28%. Ghanim thinks the shutdown from the coronavirus may push it as high as 50%. Usually, on a Saturday afternoon, these restaurants in Marmakale, behind me, are full with people. But today, every one of them is closed, and the picture is the same across Hamra, downtown, and all Beirut. In the last 5 months, since the protests against the economic crisis, over 800 restaurants have closed for good. And with every day that businesses need to remain shut because of the coronavirus, it seems likely that more will end up following their fate, ultimately increasing unemployment, leading to a lower standard of living and worsening the economic crisis. Imogen Kimber, TRT World, Beirut.
Visited cities in the world, but the coronavirus pandemic has left Istanbul's streets eerily empty. The capital, on the other hand, is full of people. Top bureaucrats, scientists, policy and lawmakers have convened for a meeting of the Coronavirus Coordination Committee, headed by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
When we evaluate the current situation, Turkey seems to be in the best position, followed by Germany. But the UK and France are in an unpleasant situation, which cannot be compared to ours.
That may be because of the early measures taken by Turkish authorities. About 2 weeks after China announced the first case of the coronavirus, Turkey establishes a new science council. 10 days later, on the 20th of January, screenings begin at airports for all passengers arriving from countries with confirmed cases. Turkey is then one of the first countries to send a plane to bring its citizens home from Wuhan. And shortly after that, it suspends all flights between Turkey and China. Less than a week after Iran confirmed its first case, and before the spike, Turkey closes all borders with Iran. And 2 days after Turkey confirmed its first case, schools and universities across the country are shut down. Nevertheless, while it's still fairly limited, the number of confirmed cases in Turkey is rising. And like many countries around the world, the narrative of this pandemic has slowly moved on from containment and mitigation to how to best help the people in sectors that are worst affected. One of the first economic measures taken was Turkey's central bank cutting its benchmark interest rate by 100 basis points to 9.75%. President Erdogan says the Turkish economy has been relatively unscathed.
I believe we can make the most of this 2-month period of resistance. It is a fact we are in a good position compared to other developing countries during this period.
But the real assistance comes in the form of a nearly $16 billion stimulus package. It includes the deferral of credit payments for companies whose cash flow has been disrupted by the pandemic, an increase in the lowest pension payments to $232, and measures to assist the tourism sector in the form of lower duties on domestic flights and cancellation of accommodation tax until November. The hope is that when the calls for social distancing are over, Turkey will emerge as a country closer, more united and stronger. Ali Can Ayanlar.
Let's look at the Middle East now. Iran has closed 3 of its holiest sites to visitors despite strong opposition from protesters. Shrines in the cities of Mashhad, Qom and Shahr al-Rey were shut down to contain the spread of coronavirus. The government's just said that 135 more people have died in Iran, taking the total to 988. And Iran has temporarily freed about 85,000 prisoners in response to the pandemic. Last week, the UN asked Tehran to release them to help stem the spread of the virus. Zain Basravi has more on that from Tehran.
Certainly, as far as the security apparatus is concerned, they would not have released these prisoners if they weren't going to be able to bring them back into custody by April 3rd. That is the date for the end of this furlough. This was agreed to by the judiciary, by the justice system, or late in February, and they've been slowly releasing tens of thousands at a time. First it was 35,000, then around 50,000, then last week it was around 70,000, and now we're seeing this latest number of 85,000 announced earlier today. Now, these prisoners are generally nonviolent offenders with short prison sentences. The number that has been announced today includes some political prisoners as well, but they all should expect to go back into prison in April. On the face of it, this certainly seems like a magnanimous decision by a government that is strict, that is religious at a time of a national health crisis, but we have to look beyond that and put it in context of the prison system itself. The jails generally here are considered overcrowded. Preventable illnesses are a constant problem, and we have heard reports from prisoners inside that there's chaos in terms of trying to prevent infections of the coronavirus in the prison system. And some prisoners have even said that they've had to provide their own soap. So certainly overcrowding remains a problem, and this is certainly not something that they're doing just out of the kindness of their hearts. This is a practical measure because the prison system can't perhaps provide the required medical services that the prisoners might need.
We're going to look at the wider situation in Iran now with Adnan Tabatabai. He is a political analyst, co-founder as well of the Centre for Applied Research in partnership with the Orient. He's on Skype from Dusseldorf. Adnan, thank you for your time. What do you make of the moves that the Iranians are taking at the moment? Things like shutting down holy shrines, which is a decision it wouldn't take lightly, and also this temporary release of thousands of prisoners.
Yeah, it's a situation in which the state has now finally started to adopt the right measures. It all started with a very slow pace. Some of the decisions needed some time to be properly rolled out. But I have the impression right now that the necessary measures are undertaken, similar to what we have heard about the situation in the UK. There is no actual curfew, there is no lockdown, but people are asked to stay at home, not to travel, etc. And the other measures go along this line.
Why do you think the response, I mean, it seems to me you're indicating a slow response there. Why has that been the case, given that Iran has been one of the coronavirus hotspots pretty much since the start?
Yeah, it has turned into one because the reaction was too slow. We have had similar situations in the past with earthquakes, with floods, with other sorts of situations in which an early response would have been necessary. There is a lack of a working link between scientific research and policy decision making. There is infrastructural incapabilities. There is a very slow pace in the early response. And once the actual work is in place, things are happening, the situation is already to some extent out of control before it then slowly improves. And I would expect this to happen in the upcoming 1 or 2 weeks.
Adnan, how much has Iran been hampered by the fact that it has been under international sanctions? There's a lot made of this, the fact that they haven't had access to the drugs that are needed, to the equipment that are needed. In your opinion, is that the case?
It certainly is the case. I mean, the homemade problems of mismanagement, corruption, etc. These are beyond question. These exist, but they are all exacerbated when the supply of necessary medical equipment is stopped, and it has been stopped in the past years. When money cannot be transferred, we now have the case that Iran asks the IMF for a loan. The technicalities are quite clear. The IMF can grant Iran that loan, but how is that money transferred when the central bank of Iran is designated as a terrorist entity by the US government? And these are problems that come with these sanctions that certainly exacerbate the problems that internally exist.
Adnan Tabatabai talking coronavirus in Iran with us. Adnan, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
As the number of recorded coronavirus cases soared past 200,000, the World Health Organization announced the first trial of a vaccine was underway, the start of a long battle.
This virus is presenting us with an unprecedented threat, but it's also an unprecedented opportunity to come together as one against a common enemy, an enemy against humanity.
In the German city of Frankfurt, they've been queuing to get a free test for COVID-19 and they're losing patience.
It's so badly organized. There's a man behind me who waited for 6 hours yesterday when he actually belongs in bed.
In a televised address to the nation, Chancellor Merkel appealed to the public not to underestimate the crisis.
This is serious. Take it seriously. We have not seen a challenge like this in our country since reunification. No, since the Second World War, which depends so much on us acting together and in solidarity with each other.
In some parts of Europe, the health services just can't cope. Because of a surge in cases in eastern France, 6 coronavirus patients had to be flown by military plane from Mulhouse to the south of the country for treatment. Across France, there's a big incentive not to be out in public. If you don't have a certificate allowing you to leave home, the police can fine you up to $150. In Spain, they've already arrested dozens of people for going out since the lockdown started at the weekend. But it's not stopped these housebound Madrid residents from protesting. They're demanding former King Juan Carlos donates millions of dollars he reportedly received from Saudi Arabia to the Spanish health system. In London, it is quieter than usual, but nobody's being told to go home. For some in the British capital, the incremental approach is right.
I think the steps that have been put in place are very wise. It's once again trying to avoid the panic. If the government went into full lockdown and banned things, it's going to be it'd be a lot worse for people's well-being.
But in Parliament, Prime Minister Boris Johnson faced demands to take a more proactive stance.
Why are we waiting so long for mass testing? And why are social distancing measures merely just suggestions?
On Wednesday, Johnson did make one long-expected announcement.
After schools shut their gates from Friday afternoon, they will remain closed for most pupils, for the vast majority of pupils, until further notice.
So, different stages in the outbreak and different responses, but the challenge for the medical world and for societies in general is immeasurable. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
An outbreak of coronavirus infections in the Wuhan province of China in December 2019 is threatening to emerge as the next pandemic. At current count, over 40,000 cases and 600 deaths have been reported in China and over 300 cases in 25 other countries. Unofficial modeling studies by a number of institutions claim infections of over 150,000. The alarming speed of transmission is in part because the virus spreads through the air and by touch. Using the power of 3D medical animation, this video covers what is a pandemic, how this coronavirus is spreading, how coronavirus attacks the body, and what are recommended precautions to take for protecting against epidemics. Pandemics indicate outbreaks of disease that spread to cover an entire region or the world. A pandemic can result in massive loss of life. In the last 100 years, there have been 4 global pandemics, the worst with the 1918 influenza pandemic, resulting in an estimated 50 to 100 million deaths. While no global pandemic has been born from the family of coronavirus, 2 regional epidemics have resulted from this family of viruses. They include severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, and Middle East respiratory syndrome, or MERS, in 2001 to 2003 and 2012 to 2015, respectively, and resulted in over 1,500 deaths. Much is yet to be known about the 2019 novel coronavirus. An early study of 99 infected showed a high mortality of 11%, similar to SARS, and ICU admission rates of 23%. An earlier study described a virus pathology with an 8-day incubation period, a week of infection, followed by a potential escalation to hospitalization and intensive care over another 8 to 10 days. Other indications put the mortality rate closer to 4%. The virus has, as of February 6th, over 40,000 confirmed cases in China alone, with almost 200 cases in over 25 other countries. However, Dr. Jonathan Reed from the UK believes that the numbers of actual cases is far greater and has estimated between 170 to 300,000 by February 9th. This is because symptoms can be mild and escape reporting and testing. What's more, in stark contrast to SARS, some patients may be infectious in their incubation period before the onset of any symptoms. Mechanism of action of coronavirus. The 2019 novel coronavirus is a newly discovered strain from the coronavirus family that causes respiratory disease. Humans have long been infected by coronavirus, as it is one of those responsible for the common cold. It is a contagious viral infection spread through inhalation or ingestion of viral droplets. As a result, coughing and sneezing and touching infected surfaces are primary sources of infection. The structure of coronavirus has multiple parts. Inside the virus lies the genetic encoding that allows the virus to hijack human cells and turn them into virus factories. A protein encapsulates the genetic material known as the viral envelope. On the surface of the viron are S and HE proteins. The structure of the 2019 novel coronavirus is a mutation. For more information on this, see the link below. The large S glycoproteins are used by the virus to gain entry to human cells. They most likely attach to angiotensin-converting enzyme 2 receptors on the cell membrane, allowing the virus entry. The exact mechanism for this is not known. Most likely, as shown here, the human cell ingests the virus in a process known as endocytosis. Once inside the cytoplasm, the endosome opens to reveal the virus's genetic material, a single-stranded RNA. The virus hijacks the cell's machinery to replicate the RNA in N proteins and uses the endoplasmic reticulum to form its M protein outer layer and the all-important S protein. After replication, the virus is carried by the Golgi bodies out of the cell in a process known as exocytosis, so that it can infect other cells. Meanwhile, the stress of viral production on the endoplasmic reticulum eventually leads to apoptosis, or cell death. It should be noted that the mechanism of action for 2019 novel coronavirus is unknown. However, scientists in China have sequenced the genome, while others have used the sequencing to visualize the structure. There is currently no cure or vaccine for the 2019 novel coronavirus, and treatment is only supportive. Therefore, preventing transmission is paramount. As an airborne virus, recommended precautions are similar to those for preventing the flu. This includes washing hands regularly with soap and water for 20 seconds, covering sneezes and coughs with the inside of the elbow, refraining from touching high-contact surfaces like railings and doorknobs. If you use tissues, throw them away immediately. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. For more info on precautions and best practices, see the list of references below. The pandemic risk of the novel coronavirus is very real. However, biology has advanced greatly in the 15 years since SARS, and so has communication between biologists and governments. China has taken monumental efforts to contain the spread of the virus. Also, some existing and experimental drugs are offering hope for treating the infection and improving outcomes. But even still, infection control habits remain paramount if humanity is to stave off a full pandemic. For further information, see the resources listed here.
For weeks now in Beijing, there hasn't been any point in getting up early. The only reason to do so is to check the latest number of new infections right after waking up.
Have you seen the figures? There are almost 45,000 confirmed cases of the illness.
I came to work in China as a journalist in 2007 and got married to Lulu from Beijing. We have one son and live in a housing complex in the north of the city. I travel around China a lot, making reports, but now I've been grounded.
Only Tibet is still okay.
Cordons have been erected around cities, but also around entire provinces, as well as city districts and even every housing complex. Outside my neighborhood block, uniformed men check everyone's comings and goings. The neighborhood committees are important cogs in the Communist Party's security apparatus, there to monitor residents' political and social behavior. Now they're functioning as health police. Temperature checks, enforced quarantines upon leaving the city, mandatory face masks. Beijing's residents have bit by bit disappeared from the face of the city, their movements curtailed by the regime and their own fear. The only report that I can make is one about Standstill, a quarantine diary. The days seem uneventful, but they raise many questions about China's future. There's one good thing about the situation. Now that our family is together 24/7, we're more united than ever. I've even persuaded my son to help me. We have to fetch water. The tap water is undrinkable, so water containers are delivered on most days. But since our district was cordoned off, we have to collect them ourselves. My son is lucky because the barricade isn't very high. Since the outbreak of the virus, Lulu and I have been wearing his and hers fashion accessories, face masks. Mine black, hers white. Lulu is unhappy she can no longer wear lipstick. But since the quarantine started, the wearing of face masks has been strongly advised. Basically, if you leave the apartment without one, you'll be stopped. The remaining entry point to our district has become a checkpoint. You need a special pass to get in and out, and it's checked every time. Permission can be refused at any time. You might think it's 5 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, but in fact, it's Friday afternoon. Normally, people would be going shopping now, and Beijing would look like this. It's nice to have a bit more space, but we're feeling a bit lonely. And what makes things worse is getting our temperature measured every 300 meters. But is it really such a good idea to be pressing these devices onto dozens of different people's wrists? The mall is almost empty too. Usually we have to wait half an hour to get a coffee, but people don't feel like going out. At least there are a few young guys playing basketball, bringing a bit of life to the place. But I'm surprised they aren't wearing masks. At the moment, there's still disinfectant to clean our hands. But for how much longer? At the supermarket entrance, another checkpoint. At least there's a bit more life here. Since being in quarantine, cooking has become our main activity. The sight of these supermarket shelves is almost comforting, but only almost. We've all seen the images of empty shelves in the city of Wuhan on social media. The situation at the epicenter of the outbreak, where thousands are sick, is ever present. It's feeding a sense of collective anxiety. That's even though our situation is nothing like the one in Wuhan. In Beijing, there are only 100 official coronavirus cases. The capital is hermetically sealed off nonetheless. In the subway, I'm meeting Ms. Lee, my interpreter. Before I even say hello, I already know her skin temperature, 32.1 degrees Celsius. All subway entrances are now fitted with infrared cameras. If your temperature tops 37.3 degrees, you're isolated behind a barricade and sent to the hospital. And of course, there's also someone checking for face masks in the subway. Not that there's much to check. Normally, the trains look like this. The real problem is the shortage of masks. Together with Ms. Lee, I'm going to investigate the problem.
No, we're closed. Try there.
Here it says masks sold out.
Hello, do you still have masks?
Only electric ones.
Can I look?
He only has a mask for 40 euros, which, of course, he offers us straight off.
Will it definitely guard against the virus?
Which virus do you mean?
The coronavirus, of course.
You have to change all the standard masks every 2 days to be on the safe side.
Every 2 days?
Yes, to ensure that you're protected against the virus. That isn't necessary with this electrical mask. It can be used for 2 months. No problem. 2 months.
What about the standard masks like yours? Could I have one like that?
No, I don't have any more. You're too late. They're sold out for today.
Should I try again tomorrow?
Yes, that's normally how it works. But get here early because we only get a limited number of masks. Everyone in the district knows that, so they arrive early and are prepared to wait in line. Everything linked to this outbreak is controlled by the government. It's rationing the amount of masks that we're allowed to sell. Could you stop filming, please? It'd be better if you didn't film this, okay?
I go to Tiananmen Square to see what it looks like in the heart of the city. The pavements are cordoned off. You can only get around the square by bike. On its north side is the Forbidden City. Everywhere there are police officers guarding the entrance to this huge palace complex turned museum. It has never been more forbidden than now. Just a few meters away, Zhongnanhai, the seat of the state council and the Communist Party headquarters. The country's top leadership both lives and works behind this gate, cordoned off because of fear of the virus. It's impossible to stop here. I'm familiar now with the situation in my district and in the city center, but what about the working class districts on the outskirts of Beijing? Are they under the same quarantine? The companies are housing their workers in small single-room dormitories. In a model proletariat, no one would dare contradict the party. Mr. Chen is a chauffeur. I've hired him for a day to show me his district.
Anyone who wants to enter has to get registered. I'll go out and arrange it with them.
No one is allowed into the quarter without a pass. We try it using Mr. Chen's.
This is my pass for the quarter.
We aren't the only ones waiting. Everyone's being checked by the neighborhood committees. The Communist Party's security apparatus is omnipresent in the fight against the virus. The committees are the party's local arm. It's their job to enforce the quarantines in the affected districts. They issue the permits and inform authorities about anyone who is running a temperature or not wearing a mask. The neighborhood committees have grown since the beginning of the crisis. These people call themselves volunteers, united in the battle against the virus. But whether they've got an armband or not, they are in fact paid by the city authorities to ensure people stick by the rules. The checks are strict, and you can only leave the area for restricted hours. To our surprise, they allow us to proceed.
When the gates are closed, you can't get in, no matter what. Recently, I had to sleep in the car.
The streets and alleyways are empty here too. It's not easy to find someone to interview. This man is the only one. He's venturing outside for the first time in 2 days.
I've got potatoes, noodles, garlic, tofu, and vegetables. I went shopping and needed to buy more than usual because there are 3 of us, and I'm the only one who leaves the apartment every 2 or 3 days. So, goodbye.
Back home, there's a surprise waiting for me. This is the first time I've seen an ambulance outside the entrance of our apartment block. And yet, no suspected cases have been reported. For our reassurance, we can see practically in real time whether or not there are sick people in our building. There are several apps that localize people who have the virus.
This blue dot is me. This is our building. Around it, the yellow buildings are ones where sick people are recorded as living. The darker the color, the more recent the case.
Every red dot is a coronavirus case. No one slips through the net in a society where everyone is tracked by shopping, going about their daily business, or via facial recognition.
I click here on the ill person to see where they have been. To a fruit dealer and a bistro. They're 2 or 3 kilometers away. We are here, and we're definitely not going to walk 3 kilometers to buy an apple, so it's fine. These new technologies make everyday life a lot easier. But they also create fear.
The apps show most of the sick as being in the center of Beijing. The main shopping drag, Wang Fujing, is dead. Usually, Beijing's equivalent of the Champs-Élysées is thronging with people out shopping or window shopping. But today, there are public health videos rather than ads playing on the electronic billboards. The food market in the middle of the street, where you used to be able to buy insect larvae and scorpions, is closed. There's a sign saying it's going to be renovated, but it doesn't say when. These are agonizingly long days for store and restaurant owners. Miss Zhang is in charge of the only open cafe around here. Today, I'm her only customer.
When the epidemic first broke out, we had to find a way of coping. We assumed the whole thing would probably go on for the first half of the year. I have a lot of friends in the restaurant trade, and we're all in the same situation. We're under a lot of pressure if our estimates are correct. We don't know when business is going to pick up again, and we're keeping a very close eye on developments. When things improve, we'll hear about it on the news. We keep calculating when we might have more guests again, based on the latest infection figures.
The city is sleeping, but we're going stir-crazy at home. So we decide to go out. It'll do us good. Because we can't be visited by anyone from outside and everything is closed, we pay a visit to our neighbor, Gary. Up to now, we had only met on the parking lot.
Hey. Hello, sir. How are you doing? Hard time. Yeah, it's hard time. Have a seat.
The second-hand car dealer lives here with his wife and cat. For more than a month now, he has been sitting at home and twiddling his thumbs, like all of us. Since the start of the quarantine, he hasn't missed any of the news broadcasts on CCTV, Chinese state television.
In 2003, at the time of the SARS epidemic, I was in my third year at the university. I think people were less worried back then. People are far more worried than they were about SARS. People are saying that the mood is different because of WeChat. Fear is spreading because we're communicating with one another more due to social media. At the time of SARS, these platforms didn't exist. In 2003, the authorities in Beijing committed grave mistakes. They hushed things up, and that created big problems. But I believe they have made progress, and they've got the situation pretty much under control now. Maybe they tried to cover things up at first. I don't know.
Based on the information he hears from the government, Gary prefers to stay at home. Every evening, state TV shows images of the crisis, pictures of hospitals, patients, and above all, the military and medics working together in perfect coordination. And on the ground shots from cities where the state apparatus is naturally shown as intervening swiftly and efficiently, even cleaning the street with mops. The premier sets a good example. The message, everything is under control. As every day goes by, more people disappear from Beijing's streets. Normally, there's an almost constant flow of cars and consumers along this road. Today, nothing, just silence. This banner reads, "We are all united, and thanks to this trust and the scientific strategy of state leadership, this epidemic will be vanquished." The regime is obsessed by the concern that fear about the virus could spark social unrest or criticism of the leaders. The party seems more worried about that than about the coronavirus itself. People spreading information on social media can expect sanctions. Blogger Fang Bing was arrested at home by the police.
Who's there?
The police.
The police?
Yes, open up.
Why are there so many of you? Stop taking photos. Why are you here?
We're here because of you.
Where are you taking me? What do you want from me?
Come on, open the door.
First, I want to know where you're taking me.
Finally, the police broke the door down. Fang Bing hasn't been seen since. The blogger had been filming since the start of the crisis in Wuhan and posting his videos on social media. He ventured into hospitals, showed overflowing waiting rooms, dying patients, and doctors and nurses at breaking point. Unsanitized images. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese people had been following him online and watching how he openly denounced government inefficiency.
You'll get your punishment and pay for your deeds. All anti-communist forces must unite. Even if you arrest me, I am not afraid.
An unbearable affront to the regime. But this type of video managed to spread through social media before the government was able to intervene. So too did videos filmed by Chen Shuxi in Wuhan's hospitals. He showed sick people not being treated, desperate people who were not being attended to despite having had a fever for days.
Hello, this is Chen Shuxi. It's 11 a.m. on January the 30th.
This was his last video before he was quarantined.
I'm frightened. I have the virus before my eyes and state security breathing down my neck. But I'm not going to let that get me down. I'll carry on reporting in this city as long as I live, and I'll show what I see and hear. So go to hell. Does the communist regime think that I'm afraid?
Over the last few days, I've noticed a few posts on WeChat and Douban, the Chinese equivalent of Facebook and Twitter, that also challenged the official line. They were written by a blogger couple in Beijing. Accompanied by an interpreter, I visit them in their small city center apartment.
We haven't been outside for days, and we're just killing time.
Since the start of the crisis, there has been a rise in the number of citizen journalists in China trying to disseminate information to supplement the official version of events, a tentative breath of freedom. With limited means, the two bloggers wanted to spark a mini revolution after Dr. Li Wenliang died. The doctor from Wuhan was the first to try to warn the public about the new disease. He was arrested, but died after contracting the illness, and became a symbol for this absurd system that silences people to maintain the regime's stability.
When Dr. Li died, people were sad and angry. I wanted to honor him by getting as many people as possible to use a drawing of his face as their profile picture in social media, or to send posts with messages like, "It's no crime to express your opinion," or Have a safe journey to paradise, a kind of online demonstration. 30 minutes after I had posted my call to action, thousands of users had changed their profile picture and shared my post. The internet police got wind of it and sent me a warning. The content you posted will be deleted as it could lead to unrest. If you refuse to cooperate, your account will be permanently deleted.
In China, everything functions via social media. Payment systems, communication, smart ticketing for public transport. If you don't have an account, you're down and out.
At first, Kai-Chen and Sanlian Life Week reported very actively on the situation. Then state television sent 300 reporters to Wuhan with the aim of steering public opinion and quashing other reports. The regime now rules with a hard hand.
The media has also been placed in quarantine. China's citizens are not just effectively incarcerated at home, they only have access to information permitted by the regime. The two bloggers are suffering the consequences.
So here we are, no internet. Our apps are no longer online.
The software tools that they use to dodge the censors and gain access to banned websites such as Twitter have also been blocked. Week 2 of our quarantine. The barricades at the entrances of our housing complex have now been reinforced with 2-meter-high green wire fencing. Though it's not as if anyone could have gotten through the cordon as it was. Every day is like the next. A never-ending stream of suppliers provides us with the essentials. But collecting the water containers is getting more and more difficult. We feel a little more locked in with every day that passes. Lulu rings her cousin to find out how her daughter is doing. The 7-year-old hasn't left the family apartment for several weeks now.
Wait, I'll get her. She's just getting dressed.
Her school is closed, of course. Remote learning is the order of the day.
How does it work with classes? Tell your aunt.
I sit down at the table and switch on the television. I learn my lessons there. And when I'm finished, the teacher gives me my homework.
Do you speak to one another via Skype, like we are now?
No, it was like that at first. The teacher could see us. But now it's all on television. And the teacher can't see us anymore.
Lulu's cousin shows us what daily life is like for her daughter. Tong Tong is an only child. Her daily routine under quarantine is carefully planned. She gets up at 8 a.m., then it's time for breakfast. The rest of the morning is devoted to learning, and the day starts with an exercise class just like at school.
下面我们就可以用圆形来代替这15个小朋友。
2 days ago, we started having to pass through this large military tent. The monitoring system has become more tightly organized. The color of the passes now changed to reflect the number of sick people in the vicinity. Ours are pistachio green. No idea what that means. We film secretly using our mobile phones. Cameras are not welcome in the monitoring zones. Outside, it's worse than ever. The streets are almost empty. The only people we meet are either wearing a red armband or are there to take our temperature. It's so empty. The basketball players have disappeared too. The court is now closed until further notice.
Can I have my pass?
On our way back through the tent, we get stopped again.
How long have you had this pass?
Sorry?
And did you leave Beijing?
No.
You're going to get new passes. We'll make you 2 new ones. These are too old.
Why are we getting new ones?
Because they're better. They're valid longer.
Okay.
We only have 2 passes for 3 family members, and now they're white. Is that a good or a bad sign? I have no idea, but we don't complain. Others have only got 1 pass and are only allowed to leave their homes every 2 or 3 days. Week 4 of the quarantine. The barricade's now too high to pass over any water containers.